This podcast is brought to you by Ranch Vision, the software ranchers use to boost profits and make better decisions.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rich Brazil. I am the founder of Ranch Vision. This program was designed for producers like you. It's a unique, one-of-a-kind, forward-looking software program that enables you to see the results of your management decisions months and years into the future, from your herd numbers to your replacement costs, break-even values, enterprise efficiency, your profit and loss, your cash flow, and so much more. With this program, you can move forward with confidence into the future. Ranch Vision isn't a historical record-keeping program like all the other programs you might have seen. It looks forward. It is a very challenging, very competitive industry, and every ranch business is unique, has different variables, different opportunities, different constraints. Ranch Vision was designed to take uncertainty out of your future, to enable you to plan to profit. Please go to our website to learn more, www.ranchvision.io. Grazing livestock and just grazing animals in general are a significant part of the planet. That really is the planet.
The average age of the farmer in America is 58 years old. That is not sustainable.
We've been hit with water curtailments. We've been hit with low prices by the conditions, by the rain, by the lamb crop, by the calf crop.
I heard a Native American gentleman say, wilderness, that's an invention of the white man, because we took care of this land.
Sometimes fighting doesn't mean shouting and screaming and pounding your fist. Sometimes it's just putting your boots on and being there for work the next day.
It is, or the American people think to govern themselves, to rule themselves, to control themselves. I believe they are. My opponents do not. I believe in the right of the people.
There are cowboys still around. You just probably don't see them because we're working all the time.
I'm Keely Brazil Cavello, and this is America on One.
Steve Hilton, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course, great to be with you.
Congratulations on winning a tough primary, moving on to the race against Javier Becerra in November. It's exciting.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny. I appreciate that. And it was great to see the results come through. But it's interesting. I kind of hear that word win and think, well, we haven't won anything yet. We got to, the big job lies ahead because it's all about making change. We can't do that unless we win in November, which is going to be tough. But I've always said it's difficult, but not impossible. And we just can't give up on the state. And I just fear for California if we don't win. And I think a lot of people sense that. So even though the odds are, people look at this race and they say, oh, it's such a Democrat state and Becerra's a shoo-in and the race is basically over. That's the kind of media commentary. That's not how I see it at all.
Well, I do think, and I want to focus our conversation today on kind of the rural California issues. But looking at this race, this does look like maybe the sharpest rural policy contrast California has had in the governor's race in a very, very long time. You versus your opponent, looking at your visions for working California, couldn't be a starker difference.
Yeah, I think that first of all, he's just the status quo candidate, and they've put forward a status quo candidate at a time when there's a clear majority of Californians across the state who want change, but it's particularly strong in rural areas because it's just so striking. I've traveled the whole state, up and down. I've been on the road constantly for the last nearly a year and a half now since I launched my campaign, and I've really spent a lot of time in rural areas because it matters. And I think it's disrespectful and ridiculous to, think that California is just the coast, which is where most of these Democrats seem to be focused. And you just get a sense that they really, truly don't care about what happens. And they are imposing their ideological kind of viewpoint on all of the state, but particularly the contrast, exactly as you say, is with rural areas, where in the name of their climate ideology or whatever it may be, is actually crushing the lives of working people in rural areas. You see it in so many different ways, whether that's the ranchers in the north or the farmers in the Central Valley and elsewhere. It's just, and right down in the south in Imperial County, everywhere you go, you hear the same story, which is they don't understand our lives, they don't care about us. And you see it with, whether that's hospitals closing because of the high costs of running rural hospitals because of all the mandates and insanity that they've imposed. Water, of course, the labor issues, the regulatory issues on environmental, and the energy costs, all of it adds up to it feels like an attack on rural California, actually.
Right. And you've spent a lot of time in rural California on your campaign. I've noticed that from Fresno all the way up north to, Shasta County and beyond.
Yeah.
You've been a California resident for a while. How has this campaign kind of shaped your view of this state? What would you say maybe to someone back in the UK who thinks of California as, the beaches and Hollywood at this point?
Yeah.
Have you seen the other side of California on the campaign trail?
Yeah, and it's actually what I've loved most about it, honestly, is just seeing these incredible parts of our state that you just wouldn't normally get the chance to see. I've lived here since 2012, as you mentioned, and I've been in love with California for longer than that. We came and lived for a brief period in 2008, and so I love everything about California. But I didn't realize just the scale of what we've got going on here. One of the most memorable moments, actually, I just mentioned Imperial County. The first time I went to Imperial County was and it was a real contrast. It's almost exactly what you're describing, because I remember I had this was before I was a candidate. I was really just on my own. I'd set up a policy organization, Golden Together, and I was doing events and learning and focusing on different policy issues. And I had a drive, which was from LA down the coast, a couple of stops in Orange County. I had an event in San Diego, beautiful coastal drive, down PCH, and then the 5 past Camp Pendleton. And because from San Diego, I drove to Imperial County. I had an event in Brawley in Imperial County. I'd never been there before. And for those who, it's now turning into a long story, but for those who don't know, I don't have a smartphone. I just have an old-fashioned flip phone. So when it's just me in those days, I would look up the directions and, write them down on a bit of paper and then drive. And I remember looking up the directions across from San Diego, the 8 freeway, and I just saw it, and I just assumed it was a flat drive out to Imperial County. And then you just have this incredible drive through these magnificent mountains, epic views, and then down into the Imperial County, and it was January, incredible agricultural area. At one point, like most of the salad crop in the world is grown in Imperial County at that time of year. And then this ranching community in Brawley, and just thought I'd never even knew about this.
Yes.
And it was one of the most memorable, actually. But there's been so many moments like that.
I know. It's such an incredible state. What was it about California that made you choose not only to become an American, but to pick California as your home to raise
Well, that
your
was
family?
really a pretty much a function of our family situation, because when we moved in, as I said, 2008 for a little bit and then 2012 permanently, really it was driven by my wife's career. She was, at that time, most of my career has been in business, but I've had a few stints in working in the government. In the UK, I was senior advisor to the Prime Minister, David Cameron, back in the day. So I was working in 10 Downing Street, big job there, really focusing on our domestic policy reforms. And then my wife, she was working then at Google. She was head of comms at Google, and she was doing that job from London because I had this job in 10 Downing Street. And when our second son was born, it was really a lot. The time difference and the travel and so on. So that's really why we moved here. And that's why we actually are in the Bay Area, because for her to be close to her job. And so that was the reason. But it was just, I felt immediately at home, like this is where I'm meant to be in so many different ways, not just because of all the things we've discussed in terms of the beauty and magnificence of our state and all the richness that you can see. There's something about the soul of California. I call it the rebel spirit. Like the reason we've been such an amazing state and create all these world-changing industries is because we've had that attitude of just not accepting the way things are and doing things our own way, and people who innovate and disrupt and so on. And I think actually that's what's being crushed right now by this bloated nanny state bureaucratic government that's just bossing us around the whole time and telling us what to do and how to live our lives and how to raise our kids and how to run our businesses and what car to drive and what kind of house to live in and how to cook our food, no gas stoves, on and on. And it's just really anti-Californian, I think. That's one of the real drivers for me. It's almost like we got to liberate California and restore the soul of our state.
I love that. I totally agree. I always think California, we're still the descendants of the people who went as far west as you could go till they ran out
Yes,
of land. And that spirit is
yes,
totally dominant here. And it's still a frontier in a lot of ways. We're disconnected from Washington. We do things our own way. But I love that. You're right. At root, that's what's so offensive about a lot of these bad ideas is it goes against the spirit of our state.
exactly, exactly. It's very, very deep, and I'm trying to capture that in the campaign because I think that in many ways what we need to do here from a policy point of view and my mission and my job as governor is not that complicated. Like in some other parts of America or other parts of the world, if you're running for office and you're trying to put a plan together, what do and you got to think about how are we going to attract investment? How are we going to get people to want to come here? How we have to be creative about all these things. In California, we've got all these incredible advantages. You don't have to do very much, right? You just, as government, you just have to get the basic things right, good roads and good schools and public, you keep people safe, and that's it. And people will do the rest
So
because
true.
people want to be in California. And so and that's the biggest sort of indication of their failure, 16 years now of one party rule, is the fact that so many people are leaving. Like, was it in Fareed Zakaria, the guy on CNN, did a piece that got a lot of attention about a month or so ago. He opened his show on CNN. It was just after the primaries, and he highlighted my success and so on. And he said, "Look, California is." He described it as a failed model of governance, and he specifically mentioned this. I hadn't heard this statistic put in this way before. In 7 years, that's the years that Newsom's been governor, on net, 1.9 million people have left California.
Wow.
Like, what, you got to work really hard to drive people out of a state as amazing as ours, and that's what they've done, and that's what's so outrageous about them, and that's why we've got to kick them out this year.
Yeah. Well, before we get into policy, I do have a bunch of questions for you about rural policy, but I want to ask you a strategy question. So you obviously do have an uphill battle winning this state. We're a pretty firmly blue state. You need a lot of Democrat support. Spencer Pratt was in second place on election night in LA. Then the late ballots came in. They were legally postmarked and harvested and all of that as far as we know. And a week later, he's locked out of the runoff. I was listening to Victor Davis Hanson calling this California's vote harvesting machine, the same-day registration without ID, 7-day ballot windows, paid operatives collecting ballots door to door, including homeless encampments, we found out. So if that's legal for both parties, Democrats built this machine, they run it ruthlessly. Why don't Republicans? How are we fighting fire with fire in November?
You nailed it. That's exactly what we need to do, and I'm that's a big part of our focus. So we're just getting ready to launch this phase of the campaign coming, and you'll be seeing a lot from us in the next starting in the next few weeks. But the less visible part is the work that I'm doing right now to actually raise the money, frankly, because that's what it needs to build that machine. And we know that we can do it because a very similar operation was built nationally in 2024 for the Trump campaign, and Elon Musk and others were involved in that. And it was a very powerful get out the vote, ground game, ballot harvesting. Charlie Kirk. So Charlie, good friend of mine. I don't want to, I'll get upset when I just talk about Charlie, but one thing I'll just mention in this context is that he's one of the first people I spoke to about running. And he's, in his typical way, he said, he didn't just say, "Oh, great, good luck." He said, "Right, come on, let's make a plan. Come to Phoenix." This is a year or so before I even announced. It was actually before the 2020, about a month before the 2024 convention. And I spent a day with him in Phoenix at Turning Point headquarters, and he took me around what they built there called Chase the Vote as part of Turning Point Action. And we went around the whole thing. I spoke to all, and they were doing it, particularly in Arizona, to make sure that and doing it for the Trump campaign. Very serious, professional, well-financed operation. So we know how to do this. And it was done effectively in 2024. That's one of the reasons that the Trump campaign won all the swing states, all of them, because they had a really good operation that was built pretty quickly, actually. And so we can do that. There's a model for how we can do this. And we've got to do that. And it also connects to another really important point about this election, which is it's true that if you look at the polls and the basic, story of California, it's been a 60-40 situation in terms of polls, 60% Democrat, 40% Republican. And we obviously need to change that. And I've got a lot of plans around that. But and yes, we do need to persuade independents and Democrats. That's all true. But a really big part of winning is a big turnout of Republicans. That's where you start. And I think Republicans in California tend to have forgotten that. And I just want to give you the numbers. It's really important. If you look not at the percentages, but the number of votes, and you take an average of the last two midterm elections, 2018 and 2022, in California to get an estimate of the number of votes that we'll see in the general election in November, the number you get is 11.7 million. That's total votes. So to win, you would need just over half of that, call it 5.9 million. Now, actually, the primary we just had was a little bit higher than we expected in terms of turnout. So let's just call it 6 million. Target number of votes to win for me. In 2024 in California, President Trump got 6.1 million votes. Now, it's a higher turnout because it's a presidential year. The percent was around 40. But the reason I mention that is that the votes are there. Actually, when people say there are not enough Republican votes in California, it's not true. If we get a really big turnout of Republicans, that's the first big part of winning. It's not enough on its own because we're not going to get 100% of a presidential year turnout. That's not realistic. But the closer we get to that, the better our chances. And so the ground game, the turnout operation, mobilizing, all of that, very important. Also remember, voter ID is going to be on the ballot in November this year here in California. That's a big driver of turnout. Republicans very enthusiastic about that. So this is what you just mentioned there is a very big part of the story of how we win.
I do remember about May of last year, I believe, we were both at an event, a donor event that Charlie Kirk held in San Diego, and he was talking about you as the solution to California. My friend Leanne brought me. So yeah, he was already thinking ahead to this, and he had that vision for getting the vote out and never saying never, really, which I do think in California we've lost a little bit of that fighting spirit. I'm always told, why don't you just leave California, give up on it? And that's just, this state deserves so much better. It deserves a fight. It's a wonderful place. We can't just give it up without a fight.
100%. I just think it's very un-Californian, very un-American, actually, that attitude. I've got to be honest. I will just say was one last thing about Charlie, which is, because I say this on the road and people say, well, what are the chances? I say, imagine if Charlie had been like that when at the beginning of what he was building, he said, everyone said, why are you wasting your time? You're never going to get college kids to be conservative. They forget about it. They're just left. The universities, it's all gone. It's too far gone. Just give up. And Charlie saw something and he just, no, I'm not accepting that. And he said it was hard. I remember him telling me the first campus thing he did ever. He said, I went there, I put my table out and I sat there. There's like 4 hours. I had 2 people come and speak to me in 4 hours. And look what he built. He just kept going because he saw it. And that's what we've got to do here, because this, exactly as you said, this state deserves so much better than what we've got right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about a couple rural issues. And I think these affect almost everyone in California, but rural California, as we've discussed, just doesn't get a ton of attention. So let's start with water, which I think is Becerra's weakest area in all of these, personally. You've pledged day one to increase water deliveries by reversing regulatory decisions. You have a blueprint from Golden Together that was written with Edward Ring, who I'm a big fan of. So I was excited to see that. Calls for 10 to 15 million acre feet of new supply. Contrasting that with your opponent, he sued the Trump administration in 2020 to block the new biological opinions expanding Delta pumping. He filed that the day after Trump's Bakersfield memorandum promising the Valley more water. He sued the first Trump administration over 100 times as AG, more than half on environmental policy, and created an Environmental Justice Bureau at California DOJ. So that's where he's coming from. Can you just paint me a picture of the contrast in your governance and how you'd accomplish that big vision for expanding California Water Project?
Yeah, it's a really important. Thank you for reminding everyone about that. I mean, it's a great example of how he is just the creature, the puppet of the of the forces that have really wrecked California. And there's basically three of them. And you see it coming together in the water issue, also on the housing issue, which is the climate extremism, the unions, and the trial lawyers. And they together, they've just combined to make everything so impossible and so expensive. Let's just, on water specifically, you've got this ideology of scarcity that says, we can't have, we've got a water constraint. There's a drought. We don't have enough water. We got to ration water, and we can't be giving water to the farmers because they're stealing our water. And that's the ideology that's in play. And you see that in these biological opinions. That's why that's a very important term, because there's a short term, a medium, and a longer term, right? In long term, we need more infrastructure because we need to increase supply. We just need more water available because we want to grow in California. We want abundance. That word abundance, which actually came from a book from a guy on the left, Ezra Klein, who's a big figure at the New York Times. I completely agree. We should have abundance in California. We should, but the policies of the Democrats go in the other direction. So we need to get to right now. We have water infrastructure that hasn't really been added to in the last 40 years or so. I think that's the right length of time. And since then, the population's doubled. It's gone from like 20 million to 40 million, and we're still dealing with using the same infrastructure. So we have to build more infrastructure. I'll get to that in a second. But even before you do that, within what we've got now, without building anything, you can increase deliveries of water from what we've got right now. That's what those biological opinions are all about. It's very important. The State Water Resources Control Board, that's where this is all happening. It's an agency of the state government it's part of the executive branch, therefore controlled by the governor. And you've got bureaucrats in there who are deciding the allocation of water from the resources we have. And there's basically two systems for water delivery in California. One is state-owned. The California Aqueduct is the main artery, and the other is federal. The Delta Mendota Canal is the main artery. They're basically bringing water from the north to the south. That's roughly what it's all about. This is the state. All of this was built in the 30s and so on. It started in the 30s and then expanded in the 50s. And so you can, I don't want to say overnight, but very quickly increase the deliveries, because you've got these. Remember, Trump spoke about he talked about a giant spigot, and he was mocked. Everyone said, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. There's no giant spigot. Ha ha ha! Stupid Trump." Well, I actually went there. There really is. There's two pumping stations. A lot of this is all concentrated around the Delta, and you've got the water from the reservoirs in the north, and it all comes there around the Delta near Tracy, if people are interested. And there's I can't remember, one is the Bill Jones pumping station, and the other I can't remember. And one controls the federal supply, and the other is the state supply. And there's just it's not a faucet like you turn a tap, but it's a pumping station that you control how much water goes in and out. And you can increase that. That's what Trump did. And most insanely, and Becerra was a part of this, when Trump, in the first Trump administration, increased deliveries through the federal system, so federal water districts like Westlands, for example, got more water, farmers there got more. To balance it out, the state reduced deliveries in the state system because the argument is we need to put more fresh water into the Delta, the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. Why? Because we've got to keep the fish healthy there, the two fish that they're upset. So again, when Trump talked about the fish, he's right. That's the argument they use. The Delta smelt, this tiny little fish that actually was extinct. It actually had to be reintroduced via a breeding program from UC Davis that they basically did as a pretext for all this. It's just all crazy. It's environmental extremism. And so you can't, sorry, I'm going on about it because I spent a lot of time on it. You can actually change these decisions as the governor, and I will. And then it'll be amazing because you'll have alignment between the federal government and the state government instead of fighting each other. So you're going to have an increase, and that's a really big feature of why it's going to be such a big change when I'm governor. And with all these, the energy secretary, the interior secretary, all these, the agriculture secretary, Brooke Rollins, these are all people that I know personally. And we're going to be working together in an amazing way to kind of transform the situation for rural California, and water is the starting point.
Yeah. My hometown issue up in Northern California, I know you've spoken about this a little bit, but perfect example of this. It's not in the Central Valley, but we have these slated dam removals. PG&E is planning to tear down Scott Dam, which is a water supply for about 750,000 people, again, with fish as kind of the impetus behind it, fish health. Removal could start as early as 2028, which would be the first years of the next governor's term within that time period. A Riverside County water district has stepped up as a possible buyer for these dams, for these Eel River dams. And the state is, of course, no help to us. I believe Gavin Newsom is behind these removals ultimately. Where are you on that? Has your campaign taken a stance on the Potter Valley project?
Yeah, I've been, and actually, funny enough, I haven't been to see it in detail. I've been.
We'd love to have you anytime.
Near it. Yeah, no, I want to see it. And I've spoken to the people who are the campaigners, and so I understand the issue. I've been in the areas around it, but I haven't been to actually see the dam, and I want to get there. But I have been further north and seen the consequences of one of the removals up there, where you've got now this river that's basically they call it the dead. I can't remember, the river of death. Or
the river of death. Yes, right. After the Klamath Dam removals.
Right, because all of this accumulated waste and toxic material was just just sent down the river, and it's just a disaster ecologically. And so and also it makes no sense from there's a whole irrigation issue and water issue. Some of them, you've got hydropower that's being removed. That's insane. This is from people who talk about renewable energy, but they don't, in order to pursue their environmental extremism, that you're in the same insane situation where hydroelectric power is now, from a regulatory point of view, not considered renewable. So another crazy example, there's a hydro project in the Sierra foothills, the Helms project there, which, according to the people who operate it, it's already producing about 5% of the state's power. It's big. It's like half what the last remaining nuclear plant is, Diablo Canyon. That it could be producing 4 or 5 times as much. Hydropower, renewable energy. But they won't let it happen because the incentives are all towards wind and solar. So on the dams, I think that some of the destruction's already happened. And they brag about it. It's one of the most disgusting videos I've seen. Newsom put out this video of the dam being demolished, and look at this great. And also they were saying this is a great, triumph for Native American rights and all of this. I mean, it's environmental vandalism, actually.
So your campaign would support a buyer. You would support protecting the Potter Valley project.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, we could go on about this forever. Obviously, touches on a bunch of issues that Newsom is right in the middle of, from environmental extremism to his sordid relationship with PG&E. So maybe let's talk about that just a little bit, jump ahead to the utility companies. You've talked about a lot of the appointments that you would make. Does CPUC, have you thought about who you would appoint there? What is your view on the relationship between California politicians and these utility companies, and what would you change as governor?
It's totally corrupt. I mean, if you look at the, there's a lot to unpack there. So first of all, in terms of companies...
Threw a lot at you, yes.
Yeah, no, you're right, but it's incredibly important. So if you look at PG&E is one of the worst examples. I mean, there's all this, stuff in the media about the Newsoms and the federal investigation and tax and whatnot. I don't know anything about that other than what's been reported. But one of the areas of speculation has been that it's part of it is these behested payments, which is this basically legalized corruption. There's no other way to describe it. It's a bit like ballot harvesting. I remember when I first heard about it, I thought, you got to be kidding. That's like they wouldn't have given it such a corrupt sounding name. Like, what are you talking about? Ballot harvesting. And then this was saying behested payments. It sounds like what it is, which is you phone up or whatever an organization, you say, I want you to give money to something. And that's what's been going on. Pet causes, including in the case of the Newsoms, his wife's nonprofit. but other causes as well. The California Protocol project or whatever it is, which is what's been paying for Newsom's overseas trips, which are basically entirely about his own personal political, ambitions, going to Davos and that, whatever. And so it's effectively a donation to them. And if you look at the non-profit that run by Gavin Newsom's wife, that's it's personal income for the family coming from that. So PG&E is one of the biggest targets of that, where Newsom has been asking PG&E for I think is it tens of millions of dollars over the years in behested payments. And it's all perfectly legal. And of course, he's making these decisions and appointments directly affecting the business interests of PG. It's totally corrupt. So obviously, that should stop. In terms of the regulatory framework, my starting point is there's just too much of it, right? It's part of the bloat. We did a report specifically on electricity regulation as part of my Cal Doge effort just before the primary, actually. And on electricity, remember, we have electric bills that have more than doubled in the last 10 years. They're the highest in the country apart from Hawaii, more than double the national average. One of the things that's going wrong is we've got this massive amount of regulation. Just in terms of the sheer bloat there, you've got 4 different agencies. You've got the California Public Utilities Commission you mentioned. You've got CARB, the Air Resources Board. You've got the Energy Commission. And you've got CAISO, which is the acronym for the independent service operator that's going to operate the grid. You've got all of this regulatory bloat. We worked out that if you compare the cost of it, the number of bureaucrats, it was 35 times as many as in any other state. It's just ridiculous. So one thing we got to do is basically massively. So the pledge I've made so far is to merge all of that and massively reduce it, to cut it all back. So you don't have this. And with CARB, the Air Resources Board, that has gone from when it was founded, which was supposed to be about air quality, to now this general enforcer of the climate extremism, which massively relates to energy. We're going to take that role away, so it just focuses on air quality. And in fact, I'm interested in whether we can remove CARB entirely, because there's a massive overlap with regional air quality boards. So I saw this myself, business operating in Fresno, not recently. They've got endless harassment from CARB, the State Air Resources Board, and their regional air quality regulator, all giving different, so there's just too much of all of this. In terms of the regulators, they've got to be there to operate in the interest of the consumer, not the companies or the politicians. And so I think the whole thing is corrupt and bloated and needs massive change. So PG&E also, PG needs to be broken up. I don't think it's I don't think it's the only thing that needs to change, because it's not just the fact that it's big and a monopoly. That's bad. You need competition. That's true. So I've made a commitment that PG&E should be broken up. We published a policy paper on that. But also, you got to remove the climate extremism that's driving a lot of these bad decisions that make prices so high.
Right. It's both for the dams, for example. PG&E was sued endlessly by these environmental groups before they eventually decided to relinquish their license on the dams. And I do believe, and I have a report coming out soon on just Newsom's involvement in that decision. And, I think that he likes the idea of removing these dams. He thinks that it makes him look green, restoring a free-flowing river, never mind impacts to rural citizens and to farming and ranching in the north part of the state. He wants to run on that. Clearly, he has presidential ambitions. And I think that was part of the deal to get the bailout bill for the Camp Fire, in which PG&E pled guilty to 84 counts of manslaughter. And then there's still victims who haven't been paid thanks to that bill. So just incredibly corrupt, and kind of seeing all the different aspects from these environmental groups that sue the government until they finally get what they want over our Endangered Species Act to, again, the relationship between...
But there's the environmental groups. I mean, the other thing that goes on with those lawsuits is that they put their people inside the agencies.
Exactly.
And then they kind of work together. and they almost invite the lawsuit. Oh, help us, shift the policy even in a more extreme direction. That's why these the environmental non-profits. I mean, environmental is not even the right word to use. It's much too
Of course
positive a word. That's
Right.
not what they are. Ideological extremists. They're anti-human, anti-growth, ideological extremists,
Right.
and they've infiltrated the entire government bureaucracy in California.
Right. We just had the former head of the CDFW head over to the Nature Conservancy as soon as he left, and he came from Caltrout. So he went from Caltrout to heading up California Fish and Wildlife to Nature Conservancy, NGO, government job, NGO. It's just the way that it goes. So yeah, absolutely. And sticking on that, the power track, you promised $3 gas by repealing the low carbon fuel standard, restructuring cap and trade, restarting in-state oil through CalGEM. Farmers, this really impacts farmers. They can't afford diesel or electricity for their pumps right now. It's getting out of control. Newsom keeps blaming Trump and his administration for high gas prices. Can you explain why you think, as governor, you can provide relief on gas prices in contrast to his claims?
I mean, let's just start right where we are. And, you drive around the state all the time, and I'm seeing the prices all the time. And, right now, high $5 something, 6, 7. The other day, I mean, there's one notoriously high gas station in LA. So it's not representative, but it's real, which had 8 something the other day. We were there in LA, and I made a video there, and the next day we were in Texas. And this is the point. Okay, fine, ignore the $8 outlier, but these very high prices we're seeing right now across California, $5, $6, somewhere in that range, in the last few weeks. We're in Texas, and it's Trump, the Iran war. Right, I was in Texas. The Iran war is also going on in a world that Texas is in, right? It's the same war, same situation. It was $3 something, $3.29, I think, in Texas today. So it's just not true that the prices are, or that $3 is unattainable. Before the Iran war, there were 40 states in America where gas prices were $3 or below. There were numbers starting with $2 in 40 out of 50 states. Most of those states have no oil reserves. Here in California, we have abundant oil reserves. By some estimates, I was with an industry group the other day, Monterey Shale, which is the big deposit here throughout most of the state, we have the second largest oil deposits in the world by some estimates. I mean, some of it may not be economically recoverable, but it's big. And so that's the starting point, which is, what are we doing? Importing oil. Now, nearly 80% of the oil that we use in California is imported on giant supertankers from places like Iraq or the Amazon in Brazil and Ecuador. It's ridiculous. And that itself is more expensive. Obviously, shipping it in just costs more. That's one thing that will bring the cost down, opening up our own production. Secondly, the regulations on the refineries, I was at Torrance at one of the refineries just the other week. They were describing how to produce a refined barrel of gas, refined gas costs about $5 a barrel at the same company, Louisiana operation, 9 or 10 in California. Just the same process because of the regulations that affect the way they do their business. On top of that, then, you have the direct costs added on, which you mentioned some of them, the low carbon fuel standard and cap and invest, as they now call it. These things sound nice. They're basically taxes on energy that are paid for by the producers and large scale users of energy that comes out into consumers. And then you've got the gas tax, which has just gone up on July the 1st to 63 cents something, from 61 to 60. So even as these Democrats go on and on about affordability and blame Trump, they just increased the gas tax just days ago. And so all of those things we can change. The governor specifically can change. And I've looked into it in great detail because I never want to make promises I can't deliver. And all of those things can be done only just through the executive branch. through the agencies controlled by the governor. Even when some of those things were set up by legislation, I've really looked at it in detail, and the governor has the power to change that without the legislature, because we're not going to get the legislature to agree to this because they're all owned by the environmental extremists and all this ideological insanity that says we've got to have, it's all about electric vehicles. I just want to put that into context. Right now in California, the proportion of the vehicles on our roads that are EVs is 7%. 93% of the vehicles on our roads run on gas or diesel. So what are they talking about? Like we're miles from, and I'm not against if people want to have EVs, that's fine. We actually have one. We have a Suburban and we have a Leaf, a Nissan Leaf. We've had both we bought them the first year we were here. They're old now, but they work. And so I'm not against EVs. People want that, that's fine, but we shouldn't be subsidizing it. We shouldn't be taking money from working class Californians and giving subsidies for fancy people to have Teslas or whatever. And we shouldn't be orienting the whole electricity system towards something that is a tiny fraction of what actually goes on in California. And that final point, the people who are really hurt by this, exactly you talk, is working class people in rural areas, the people who are on the lowest incomes in the most precarious economic circumstances. They're the ones who are really hurt by this, not the, kind of climate warriors in sort of sitting in their apartments, tapping on their MacBooks, working from home. They don't use their car. If you're working class, California, you're using your truck like hours and hours a day. And so when I say $3 gas, it's really interesting. And there are, to some people, they might hear that, oh, that's just a campaign program. You talk to someone who's directly affected by it, they can tell you the dollar amount they would save a month because it's such a big part of their working life.
Absolutely. I believe that. You mentioned imports. It's kind of another example of just how much of a lie the whole environmental language and positioning is. It really is just posturing because we are importing energy from countries that have no or very low environmental standards when we could produce it much cleaner. We could have abundance here in California. So you're right. I always say, broken record, but farmers and ranchers in this state are the best environmental stewards. They care the most about the land. They spend the most time on it, yes. To your point, about folks who are, climate warriors sitting in air-conditioned offices. The people who live by the land and on the land care deeply about its future. So we are good stewards.
The other thing I want to say is natural gas. Very important, for electricity generation. And the cost. So if you look at I've spent a lot of time with farmers, growers, and right across every step of the chain. So you take something like pistachios, for example, big crop in California. We're like, what is it, 70% of the world production, it's. When you look at the roast, the processing aspect of it. So I've been to the harvest. I've seen those the amazing machines. They keep saying you've got to have electric farm equipment. It's just insane. They've never been in a field.
Out of touch.
Where are you going to plug it in? Where it's just crazy. And there's very specialized equipment. I mean, if you watch a video, it's amazing. You've got these machines that go and they shake the tree, and there's another machine that catches them, and it's incredible to see all that. And a lot of that equipment, by the way, is designed and made in California. It's not just it's the whole ecosystem, the business ecosystem around farming is amazing. You go to the Tulare World Ag Expo, which I was at a few months ago. It's just fantastic to see the scale, all the different businesses connected to farming. Anyway, the point I was going to make on that is that, of course, there's diesel for those pieces of equipment mainly, but then natural, the processing part, drying and roasting, whatever, that's natural gas, and that's incredibly expensive because of their energy policies. So many of the inputs into the whole process of our ag industry are just off the charts expensive, and they don't care.
Yeah. Well, we used to grow about 90% of our produce, and we're closer to 60 now, and that's a big part of it. So under your governance, how would you envision California restoring that agricultural heritage and getting more farmers, not just bigger ones, but more farmers, more first generation farmers. And
Yeah.
kind of along those lines, would Sigma play a role in this? What would happen to Sigma
Well,
under you?
Sigma is the ground. So the ground Sigma's, it's like, what's it? Groundwater management.
Yeah, Groundwater Management Act. I forget what the S stands
Yeah.
for.
And so the point now, there's a real kernel
Sustainable,
of
of
truth
course.
to that. Sustainable, that's right. So kernel of truth to that, which is you don't want groundwater depletion because then you get subsidence and all sorts of problems.
Yes.
So, so it's a classic kind of scarcity mentality where they've said, oh, there's not enough water. The farmers are taking water, pumping water out of the ground, and that's causing problems. So we have to manage that and stop that. So you have all these like 500 plus districts. It's another layer of bureaucracy. These Sigma, I don't even know what they're called. It's like 500 or so of them, and they're kind of micromanaging how much water you take. Right. There's a kernel of truth to that. You don't want the groundwater to be depleted. There's a very simple solution: more surface water. Then the farmers wouldn't need to do it. It's a classic example of a bureaucratic response to a problem that they've created with their bad ideology. It reminds me of the ranchers, right? I was like, it's a very English pronunciation, the ranchers. And up in the northern counties, I remember going there, and like the big issue there's wolves.
Yes, I
And
was just going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Right, you never hear about. I'll get back to Sigma, but you never hear that in Becerra talk about that. But like, because and I remember hearing about those. What a problem it is for the they're sort of attacking the cattle. It's a big deal, right? You're losing and so because they've reintroduced wolves and it's this breeding program, and now they're kind of out of control. And I just said in a naive way, why? Well, okay, why they're predators? Why don't you shoot them? And we could get arrested. That's illegal. They've passed all this, but they're aware that there's a problem. So they've now got this bureaucratic response, which is you've got, they send people up from Fish and Wildlife, and they try and tag the wolves, and they have drones trying to follow them, and trucks, and they try and keep them under control, and they've got trucks driving around at night, waking people up. Just this crazy thing where actually the farmers, the ranchers in this case, who actually understand nature, could just take care of it without any kind of costly government bureaucratic nonsense. And Sigma's just the same. You wouldn't need Sigma at all if you had sufficient groundwater deliveries, and that's what I would make sure we have.
Yeah, let's talk about the wolves really quick. We have a predator problem in general. I mean, human aside, we also have a four-legged predator problem. Yeah, yes. And we've had, mountain lions have been off limits to hunt since 1990. We have exploding bear numbers. We can't hunt bears with dogs anymore, so that was actually really impacted our ability to fill a bear tag because that's the best way to do it up in Northern California. And now the growing gray wolf population. And we have this crazy lady in LA who wants to reintroduce grizzlies. She's never left LA. She's like an LA creature, but she got this bill passed to look into reintroducing grizzlies, which if they're looking into it, I mean, we're on the road to getting grizzlies reintroduced in California. So it's a problem. And these, they end up danger to pets and humans because there's not enough prey. There's not enough elk. There's not enough deer. What would you do for the predator problem? What would CDFW look like under you? Would you delist the gray wolf in California if you were as governor?
Yeah. I mean, yes to all of that. Well, some of it's not a yes or no. We've got to. I mean, the basic point here for me is something I believe very strongly just in general, which is decentralizing power. And that is sort of philosophically, I believe that decisions should be made closest to the people who are affected by them. And counties often have the right answer on this. Counties are pretty good, not perfect, but they're much more in touch with what's going on. And so generally speaking, I would want to, that's why, when I mentioned, air quality and CARB, I mean, I think it's crazy that we have a state air quality agency and then regional ones as well, both. And
redundancies, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And now my instinct would be, well, what do you want to eliminate? I'd rather eliminate the centralized one rather than the more regional ones. Same with this, where I would want to put the decisions around these things in the hands of counties. That would be my starting assumption, that you can decide because you know your area and you know what works and what doesn't. You're in touch with people. And I think that would be my approach on this, which is these state agencies out of Sacramento often just don't understand what's going on. And they're applying a kind of theoretical, ideological approach rather than something that's practical.
Yeah. I could talk to you about all of these different issues, but we have a few minutes left, and I want to get to at least a couple more things. So, kind of in the vein of Predators, I made a documentary a couple years ago up in the Emerald Triangle, which is where I grew up, about a murder victim. And the common belief, believe it or not, in the area was that he was killed by the cartel. And there was just an 85-year-old rancher found with, a gunshot wound to the head on actually Murder Mountain. If you've watched that Netflix series, this is kind of the area where he was a rancher. And everybody just assumed this was the cartel, which is kind of a shocking jump. But that just speaks to the situation in Northern California and how dangerous it is. I did speak to your primary opponent, Chad Bianco. He told me as sheriff that Gavin Newsom has never spoken with the sheriff's organization.
No,
he won't return their calls. When I was doing this documentary, the sheriff told me the same thing. So if you were governor, would rural sheriffs be able to speak with you? What would change in terms of your relationship with rural sheriffs?
I heard that as well from, I actually heard it not from Chad, but from the first time I heard it was the Kern County sheriff, Donnie Youngblood. And I remember him saying, like, even Jerry Brown, Newsom's predecessor, that they meet 4 times a year, the sheriffs. He said he came at least once a year, sometimes twice. Physically came. He said, guess how many times Gavin's been? Not once. It's crazy. It's so obvious that you do that and you listen. I just yesterday met with the Association of Chief Probation Officers. No contact, no conversation. And it's just weird, actually. I think, I don't know what it is about Gavin particularly. It seems much worse than with Jerry Brown. Just not engaged and out of touch. And you get the sense that Becerra would be the same. And I think that it's this idea of decentralizing power. Like you say, your area, you were elected in the county to be the primary force for the rule of law. And that's what you should be there. And you should be empowered to do that. And the cartel thing with the cannabis, I mean, is what's driving it, is something I remember learning about ages ago, actually through my podcast that I was then doing. Jorge Ventura, I think, was an independent investigative journalist, and he reported on that. And I learned so much from him about that. I couldn't believe it was going on.
Yeah,
and not just in the north, but also in other parts of the state. I remember in around Palmdale and Lancaster, there was illegal growing there, and greenhouses and stealing water and all this going on. Like, why isn't something
Steve,
being done?
it's crazy. I mean, in the far north, they're saying that the Chinese are running the cartel. They're winning the cartel war and growing all of this illegal cannabis, just greenhouses and fields. And I just say this to highlight that Gavin Newsom not calling these sheriffs back when they literally have like a transnational, war going on in these rural parts of the state is so insane. It's impacting in, Native American reservations. There's all this human trafficking going on. Talk about environmental damage. It's destroying our national forests. So we've just been so neglected in these rural parts of the state that he doesn't think he has to care about to win enough support to fulfill his political ambitions, I guess.
Exactly. And there's not enough attention on it. And that's actually, you're reminding me, we should do something on that in the campaign. It's shocking. It's really shocking.
Yeah, no, it truly is. And it's hurting kids and innocent people. So I'm glad that you're already aware of that. It's even in California, it's underreported. So, okay, quickly before I have to let you go here. And again, there's so many things I could ask you, but I do want to talk.
I feel the same.
I really appreciate your time. And again, it's very clear that you have thought about all of these issues. When I talk to rural voters, a lot of them said that they voted for you in the primary because of specific people that you have identified that you would appoint as governor.
Yeah.
And so they resonated with those appointments. They were people who were known to these rural communities and trusted by agricultural communities. So you've obviously just been very thorough in all of your policy. And so I appreciate your time talking about all of that. And on those lines, fire would be maybe the last thing we could talk about here. I'm from a town where 2 of the 3 biggest fires in the state started. Your plan flips climate spending toward forest management. Is that correct?
Yes.
And prescribed burns, fuel breaks, replanting.
Yes.
Right now, a controlled burn permit can take 2 to 3 years to get. So what's the permitting fix, and does logging play a role? Because I'd love to talk about that aspect as well.
It's a huge part of it. In fact, the very first policy paper that I wrote with Ed Ring, and also with David Tangipart, who taught me a lot about this, who's a member of the Assembly, great guy, friend of mine, very close friend, who represents this kind of part of Fresno and then up into the big district going up into the Sierras, was called Modern Forest Management. And it's a classic example of it's a little bit like the oil, actually, where we had, I think I'm getting the number, and Tom McClintock's taught me a lot about this, and also Doug LaMalfa, actually, sadly, who's no longer with us, was a great educator for me on these issues. And if you look back, I think I'm getting these numbers right, that not that long ago, we would take out of the forest, in total, 6 billion board feet a year. That's the measurement, board feet of timber. And 6, and now it's down to about 1 or just 1.5, something like that. It's a collapse in the amount, just this volume of timber taken out of the forest through the timber industry and logging. As a result of that, you've seen sawmills and that whole infrastructure massively reduced and shut down. You've got idled and empty and derelict sawmills now through the Sierras. But we're using timber in California, actually at greater numbers than before. I think it's up to about 9 billion. Where's it coming from? We are now trucking it in from Oregon and Canada and places how does any of that make sense? It's like worse for the climate. And as a result, the forests are so we're taking less out of the forests through the timber industry. Forests are overgrown, mega wildfire risk increases. And so you've got to just turn that around to a positive cycle where you incentivize through private industry. You really accelerate permitting. It's not just state, it's federal. But again, we've got a partner now, because Doug Burgum, the Interior Secretary, who I know well, I saw him the other day in DC, wants to do this. And so we've got a really good opportunity to have alignment between state and federal, because federal's a big part of the forest. They're the majority owner. There's more federal land than state land. But you've got to work together. And so that's what it's all about, is you shouldn't, if you incentivize private industry to do it, then the job is being done in a much more effective way. So it's a really big part of the story, and that reduces the risk of mega wildfires, because of course in the Sierras and in the big forested areas, it's not the ignition. They're very different. The wildfire problem is very different north and south. So in the north and the Sierras and the central, in the Sierras, basically, it's the ignitions for wildfires are nature, mostly lightning,
right?
And and that's healthy and fine, and that's not you don't want to stop that. What you want is to stop them turning into these mega wildfires that burn out of control. That's why you need the fire breaks and removing the fuel load in the forest, so they don't spread and go to the top and whatever. There's a whole set of practical things we can do there. In the south, most of the ignitions are human, either arson, which is what we now know cause Palisades, or a spark, or like
cigarette butt out the window or whatever. Yeah,
typically, so they're very different. But the solution is in many ways the same, which is reduce the fuel load. So there's a whole story there. But all of these things are just common sense. It's not complicated. Like I said earlier on, these are not difficult things. We don't need to invent some amazing new way of doing things. It's just common sense. And that's what this whole thing is about, just getting rid of the ideology that's driven us in these crazy directions.
Right. Again, we back to that point of the people who talk about environmental justice and environmental protection are actually totally disconnected from the land. We know in rural California about fire management. Native Americans before us used to clear burn all through Northern California. So it truly is a management issue. We used to even look at it that way. It used to be the Department of Forestry, not CAL FIRE. We take this militarized fire suppression approach now. But yeah, I absolutely appreciate what you're saying. And the fact that it sounds like you would also include mills and timber receipts, not just government crews thinning. You would bring back that
very important part of it,
industry
because it's much
component.
better if it's done for profit. I believe in the
Right.
profit motive as a great motivator. And so that's the best way of doing it. Then you're not the government doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, ultimate renewable resource in our timber that we have in California, but right now we're shipping it in from out of state
crazy.
instead of using it. Yeah. All right. Well, I could talk to you for much longer, but I really appreciate the time you have given me. I guess just if you have time for one last question, it's kind of what I
please.
asked.
Go for it.
This is kind of what I asked Bianco, but just coming from rural California, there's a lot of people who feel very beat down. A lot of them are considering leaving. They do not see a future in this state. They're not all Republican. Where I come from is pretty blue. It's hippie culture. There's some libertarians. There's some borderline anarchists up there. What would be your pitch to very diverse rural California to make that vote for you, to have some hope that California could become a place of opportunity again?
Funny enough, that's really who I am. It's a kind of a spiritual thing. That's why I love California. It's what we talked about before. It's the soul of our state is do your own thing, and great things will happen, and different things, because we're such a big state and it's so different. And whether that is an amazing farm that produces beautiful produce that gets or some tech invention, it doesn't matter. That's what California enables you to do. And so I, as governor, I think this is the biggest change from what we've had certainly the last 16 years. I truly don't want to tell you how to live your life at all. I just be really kind of direct and get to the heart of it. As an individual, you ask my wife or my sons, constantly embarrassed because I hate being told what to do. I cannot stand arbitrary rules. I'm constantly challenging bureaucracy, saying, why are you asking why do we have to do that? I hate that. And I hate that for our society. And that's what we've become in California. And so I'm not here to tell anyone how to live their life at all. I'm here to make sure that the government gets the basic things right. Roads, the schools should educate kids. Law enforcement should keep us set, those basic things which are not being done. While they're so busy setting up all this endless bureaucracy to boss everybody else around and tell you how to do your business, they're not taking care of their business. And we pay the highest taxes in the country for the worst results. So it's all the wrong way around. And so I'm not here to tell anyone how to live. I'm here to let you live your best life, have, just the most incredible opportunity that this amazing state can offer, and get out of your way and take less money from you in taxes and stop telling you what to do the whole time. So I think everyone can get behind that in California, wherever you're coming from politically. And that's why I really feel strongly that this campaign is truly not partisan. I know that sounds, in a way, a silly thing to say. Of course, I'm literally running as a Republican candidate. Yes, that's true. But it's really not partisan. I'm there just to make sure that this state can just be amazing again, because that's what we are when the government gets out of the way.
Spoken like a true Californian. Steve, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And good luck to you.
Cool. Yeah. Wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much.